What's up, guys? It's Nick here, and welcome back to another episode of my top 100 games list. In the last episode, we did games from 60 to 51, and in this episode, we're going to be doing games from 50 to 41. So let's start things off with number 50. Number 50. Now, this game I actually did a blind let's play of, and I really enjoyed it, and I even did a let's play outside of YouTube as well, as it was just a fun game and a great experience, honestly. And that game is Earthbound. Now, I first played Earthbound here on the channel actually, as I heard great things about it, and I didn't really know about it until really when I played Super Smash Bros. Brawl, when I saw Ness and I kind of wondered what game he was from. And I looked it up and I found it was Earthbound, and I heard really good reviews about it, and they're not wrong. It's a really great game. It has great visuals, great gameplay, great story, and just a wacky, weird adventure with a bunch of weird things that happen, and it's just fun and cool to see, honestly. And it really made itself into its own real game, as a lot of games actually copy off of Earthbound or Mother 3 because of how just well it works in terms of gameplay and in terms of visuals, and it really is one of a kind. And it's definitely a step up from Mother 2, as I have played Mother 1, and let me tell you, Mother 1 is pretty bad, as a bunch of random enemy encounters and just really bad, honestly. But Earthbound was one of the first games that really have not really random enemy encounters, as you would see the enemy and even approach you or sometimes run away from you, depending on how strong you were against that enemy. And sometimes the random encounter wouldn't even happen if you're really strong and you can kill him in one turn. It'll just say you won, which I love that mechanic, and I wish other games did that, but not many do. But there are some bad things to Earthbound. It does get repetitive. The gameplay does get a little bit repetitive here and there. You can get lost pretty easily in this game, and there wasn't really much character development. Like, there are a good amount of characters. You know, you have your party of 4: Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh, and they're all great, but they don't really have, other than when you first meet them and get introduced to them and get to see a little bit of their backstory or their history, there really isn't much else character development other than Ness kind of growing up and facing his fears, kind of. But other than really Ness, there really isn't much character development. But overall, it's still a really fun game, and I had a blast just going through that entire crazy, wacky adventure that you go on. That's why I deserved its spot at number 50. Number 49. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of multiplayer games, as more often than none, I usually like playing single player games, as I like games that have a good story, or good characters, or good gameplay. And multiplayer games tend to usually have only the gameplay aspect. And that's not really a bad thing though, but it's also the fact that multiplayer games, you can't really play it by yourself, is the thing. Like, you really have to wait for a friend to come over, or have a good online connection, or have that online capability for a multiplayer game to actually play with someone. But one game that I really love to play when friends come over, or even online nowadays, is Killer Queen Black. Now, Killer Queen Black is probably my favorite multiplayer game. It's a 4v4 where so much is going on, and you have to pay attention to so many different things that it's just not a dull moment in sight. And it's just a lot of fun to play. And it's really just a fun game overall. You play with 4 people on each team. One's a queen and 3 are workers. The 3 workers can either try and kill the queen, try and get like an economic win, which is getting all these like little orbs in your base, or to get a snail win, which is bringing the snail to the other side of the field. So there's 3 ways to win, and so you have to kind of watch everything. You have to watch where the other queen is. You have to watch if your other team is trying to do the snail victory, or if they're trying to do economic, or if they're trying to do queen kill. You have to really pay attention to everything, and I kind of love that. But the only really bad thing about this game really is that there's no single player content, obviously, because it's a multiplayer game, and that it's really only good with 6 to 8 players. When it's only 2 players, it's really just 2 queens fighting against each other. When it's 4 players, it's not too bad, but when it gets to 6 or 8, it's when things get really good and hectic and crazy, and so much is going on, and I honestly love it. Such a great game, and I highly recommend it. Number 48. Now this was a tough one for me to choose. There are a lot of great games in this series, but boiling it down to one was really tough, and that's the Phoenix Wright series. And I really liked Investigations too. I also really liked Spirit of Justice as well as Dual Destinies. But the game I went with was Phoenix Wright 3, Trials and Tribulations. Now the reason I think Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trials and Tribulations just out nudges Investigations 2 and even Spirit of Justice and Dual Destinies is mainly for its story, characters, and overall its turnabouts are one of the best in the series. As Turnabout Beginnings, Turnabout Memories, and Bridge to the Turnabout are all really good turnabouts, especially Bridge to the Turnabout, which I think is the best case in the entire series. And characters as well, especially the prosecutor, Godot, or however you pronounce his name, one of the best characters in the series, and as a matter of fact probably the best character in video game history in my opinion, as I just love his personality and his backstory and even the plot twists that show up in Bridge to Turnabout as well as Turnabout Beginnings, as it shows so much personality and how he changed over time. And he's such a great character, and yet of course he doesn't show up later on because of what happens in Bridge to Turnabout, but he's a really good character and I absolutely love him. But there are some bad things to the game as well. Third Trial, like in other trial games, Third Trial is usually known to be the worst, and it is in this game. It's not that bad as like Big Circus Turnabout, whatever it's called in the second game, but it's not the best, well, let's admit it. But also there really wasn't anything new to the gameplay. Sure, it brought back Cyclops from the second game and kind of adapted onto it and advanced Cyclops, but that was kind of brought in from the second game, so there really wasn't anything new, like how Dual Destinies had the emotion system, or how Apollo Justice had like those 3D crime scenes, or how Spirit of Justice had those visions or whatever it was. Phoenix Wright 3, Trials and Tribulations didn't really have any of that, so it didn't really bring anything new to the table, but that's not really a bad thing, as it had such a great story, great turnabouts, one of the best prosecutor in the entire series / character in the entire video game in general, and it's honestly just a really good visual novel. And also Investigations 2 probably would get a spot in here as well, but I think Trials and Tribulations just outnudges it by a little bit. Number 47. Now this game kind of defined the indie genre, and when you think of indie, you usually think of this game and its mascot, as its mascot is kind of very well known, as it's shown in over 80 games, and it's kind of crazy because it's only been 6 years since it came out, and that game is Shovel Knight. Now Shovel Knight is a great fun game. It's honestly one of the best, as it has so many different stories, being Plague Knight's story, Spectre Knight's story, and King Knight's story, all being free within the Shovel Knight treasure trove. And it even had its own fighting game spin-off, which was Shovel Knight Showdown, which is actually a ton of fun as well. And it has a great number of bosses that are also fun to interact with as well as fight, and the levels that they're based off of are also really cool and are inspired by the knights themselves, which is a really cool touch. And there's a lot to discover in Shovel Knight as you go around with this shovel whacking enemies and discovering new items and abilities and stuff like that. And it's just an overall fun game, just discovering treasure, finding treasure, and using that treasure to get new abilities. And if you die, the treasure is floating up in the air where you died, and you can always retrieve it back. But if you die again, then that money's gone for good, which I actually love that system. I also love the risk reward system as well, where the checkpoints, you can break some of them and get money from them, but it's no longer a checkpoint, which is this really cool risk reward system that I absolutely love. And honestly, the other stories, Spectre Knight and King Knight especially, brought their own new twist to the story and gameplay. Spectre Knight has like this homing in system, and King Knight has like this roll as well as like this shoulder bash, and even his own card game as well. And although I didn't really like Plague Knight as much, although I did like the customization of having different bombs and stuff, I didn't really enjoy his story or his gameplay as much because it was kind of repetitive to Shovel Knight's story, where it was going through those same levels and there wasn't really too much new from going from Shovel Knight to Plague Knight as it was going from Shovel Knight to Spectre Knight or Shovel Knight to King Knight. And I didn't really like Plague Knight's story in that case. But overall, really good. Also, I love the challenges as well. It had a challenge mode that was fun to play, and the amiibo support actually gave more challenges, and also a little like amiibo fairy, which was kind of a cute little touch. And there's actually amiibo for each knight as well, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I also didn't really like its story too much. I wasn't really that into it, but then again, it wasn't really story driven. It was more gameplay driven, and it didn't disappoint in gameplay, that's for sure. Its music is also really good, as it's even shown in and remixed in Just Shapes and Beats, which is a really good remix. And I honestly love listening to the remix from Just Shapes and Beats, as it's a really good soundtrack overall with Shovel Knight. And overall, just a really good game, and that's why it deserves its spot at number 47. Number 46. Now, it was hard for me to pick whether I liked the first game or the second game of this franchise, as it's kind of a continuation of the story, or the second game is a continuation of the story of the first game, and it really isn't that much different from the first game. So I kind of combined them and said that the number 46 spot is No More Heroes 1 and 2. So No More Heroes 1 and 2 is made by Suda51, which is probably one of my favorite video game designers of all time, as he makes these wacky, weird games, and they're just fun, honestly, as No More Heroes 1 and 2 is really just Travis just killing all these people to get the number 1 assassin spot, just to really get laid, just to get laid by Sylvia. And it's this weird story that just works, and it's funny. And Travis Touchdown is probably one of my favorite video game protagonists, just because he's just a funny guy and I love him, and he's just honestly really cool and funny, and has some of the best quotes ever, honestly, as he just says the randomest things, and it's funny, and it's just good. And the gameplay is really good too. No More Heroes 1 and 2 have really good gameplay, although I didn't really like 1 as much, because 1 had you grinding for money and doing these stupid jobs to pay to get to the next person in the assassins line, while 2 you didn't have to pay a fee to get to the next boss, but you did have to grind up for some money if you wanted better weapons or costumes or stuff. But 1 you had to do the extra missions and grind up money to get to the next boss, which I found a bit annoying, but it was whatever. I also didn't really like the Shinobu levels in No More Heroes 2, as Shinobu really wasn't that good of a character in terms of gameplay, as she wasn't as powerful as Travis, and the 2 bosses that she did fight that you played as just were terrible, and one of them was Destroy Men, which in the first game, Destroy Man was a really good boss, and then he got cut in half, but now he has two robot halves, and now it's Destroy Men, which is a great concept, honestly, but too bad the boss fight was shit, honestly. But overall, though, No More Heroes 1 and 2 were really good. Sadly, Travis Strikes Again wasn't that good, but I'm hoping that No More Heroes 3 is just as good when that comes out. Number 45. Now, I've never really been a fan of the Souls types games, as I played the first game on the Switch and I didn't really like it. But I did play a game similar to it, made by the same developers, being Sekiro. Now, Sekiro is a little bit different than the Dark Souls games, as it plays completely different. There isn't a stamina meter, and there is this stance meter instead, as you can either play defensively and do chip damage here and there, or you can play aggressively and try and destroy your opponent's stance. And it's this really cool concept of whether to go aggressive or whether to go defensive, and whether to block or deflect, or to just attack. And it's just a really cool and fun game that has a really steep learning curve, but once you get the hang of it, it's really fun. And it took me a while to actually learn Sekiro, as I was actually getting my ass kicked by not even the boss, but the mini boss, and it was really frustrating. And I spent a lot of time kind of studying the enemy, as well as learning the movement, learning how to run, as there really isn't a dodge button, but you have to either run or block, and learning how to deflect in a rhythmic order, as well as to just know when to attack and know your openings, as well as knowing the best way to destroy your opponent's stance as well. As there's a lot of different items to use as well, being like the firecracker or the axe or the shuriken, and knowing when to use those as well. And so there's a lot of different items to your disposal, as well as healing items and other like items like Fistful of Ash that can stun your opponent for a little bit. And it's just overall a really fun game. I also love the environment, the Japanese type environment that has like cherry blossoms, and it's all this like snow field, and just running around with like a grappling hook. It's honestly just really fun. And although some of the bosses were frustrating at times and definitely made me want to beat them, it definitely wasted a lot of time. But after beating them, it's so satisfying, and having that feeling, it's honestly unlike any other feeling than most other games, as you definitely feel like you accomplished something and that you beat it, and that you learn the in and out of that enemy. Especially when I beat Jinichiro, it was very, very satisfying. And when you actually see yourself learning and getting further and further into the boss and going through the different phases of the boss, it's just such an amazing feeling that is hard to capture in other games. And so it's just such a great feeling that its main reason is why it's got its number 45 spot. Number 44. Now this one was also a tough one. I couldn't really decide whether I liked the third game better or the fifth game better, but I decided to go with the fifth game, and that's Devil May Cry 5. Now, out of all the Devil May Cry games I played, that would be Devil May Cry 1, 3, and 5, I haven't played 2 and 4, and 2 I heard was really bad, and I heard 4 was pretty good, but I played 3 and 5 and 1, but I think 3 and 5 are the best in the series. And I think 5 just outnudges it by just a little bit, as I think Devil May Cry 5 has really good visuals, really good gameplay, as well as making things fresh, where you play it as Nero, V, and Dante, with the deluxe edition giving you ability to play as Virgil as well. Now, I didn't play the deluxe edition or whatever it's called, but I have played the original base game, which you only could play as Dante, V, and Nero, which are a ton of fun to play, all with their own unique gameplay style, and just a really fun action game that has a lot of cool flashy combos that you can learn, and knowing what best tools to use for each enemy. And it's a ton of fun. I also like the characters, Dante, Virgil, Nero, V, all great characters, and even returning characters like Lady and Trish who also show up. The music's also really good. Devil Trigger being one of my favorite songs, as well as Virgil's theme, and even V's theme is also good, as well as just Nico's theme as well. And it's just overall just a fun game with a lot of flashy, cool cutscenes, similar to Bayonetta 2, and it's just overall really good. Although I didn't really like the story too much, as I think 3 had a better story with the like brotherly rival, I guess you could say, with Virgil and Dante, where it doesn't really show that too much in Devil May Cry 5 until towards the end, really, where Virgil and Dante actually meet. But it's still a pretty good game, or a pretty good story, I should say, and it's an overall just really good game and a ton of fun to play and replay as well. Number 43. Now, when I first played this game, I thought it was absolute trash, as I was having a lot of trouble just getting past the second level, and I kept trying and trying and kept failing and failing, and eventually put the game down. But then after coming back to it with more time on my hands and playing more and more, I started to learn the mechanics as well as the enemies, similar to Sekiro. And as I kept playing it, I got better and better at it, and I learned the ins and outs of the game to just become this complete powerhouse and destroy any enemy in my way. And that game is Enter the Gungeon. Now, when I first played Enter the Gungeon, I couldn't even get past base floor 2, as I was having a lot of trouble maintaining health, and I kept getting hit, and I didn't really master the dodge roll mechanic. But when I did master the dodge roll mechanic, and knowing when to bob and weave, and knowing when to dodge roll and bosses' attacks, as the bosses were pretty much bullet hells, and knowing when to do either dodge roll or just to do slight movements was very important in order to actually beat the game and destroy the bosses. And it's about learning the bosses, similar to Sekiro, like I was talking about. It's that feeling of learning the enemy, and once you do, and learning the mechanics as well, it's a satisfying feeling of being able to beat the boss and destroy it. I also loved Enter the Gungeon for its synergies as well, especially when it got the updates and it actually told you the synergies and what synergies you got, as a lot of the guns can synergize with other guns or even items as well. As there's also characters too, as each character has their own new starting ability, whether it be the Marine with its helmet giving you 1 armor, the pilot, which actually gives you discounts on items, as well as starting weapons as well, which the Marine has probably the best while the pilot has the worst. Then you have like the Convict, which if you hit, it angers her and she does double damage for a little bit. You also have the Huntress, which has a bow and arrow as a second weapon, as well as a dog that can find hidden items, and other characters as well, like the Robot, the Bullet, and the Gunslinger. There's a ton of different characters, each with their own different starting abilities, as well as starting weapons, like the Bullet has a sword, and even the Robot, which only has armor, no health. And it makes the game fresh, as playing as these different characters kind of makes the gameplay a bit different. There's also different modes as well, like rainbow mode, where you start off with a rainbow chest, so you can only choose 1 item out of that rainbow chest that you opened and start the run with that, as well as a blessed run, which you can't pick up any guns, but your gun changes every few seconds or so to a random gun, and it's pretty fun. And it's honestly just a overall fun game, especially it has its own co-op too, which is really fun playing it with a friend. It's always a good time. its story is also really good. Each character has their own backstory or past that they died in, and they're in the Gungeon trying to find the bullet to kill the past as they shoot themselves with the bullet to kill the past, and they go to their past before they died and kind of change the past so that they're alive pretty much, which is a pretty cool story, and I kind of like it as each character has their own past that you get to go through, and you get to change that past by destroying the person that killed you pretty much, which is a pretty cool concept and honestly a lot of fun. But there's some bad things to it, as Enter the Gungeon is a roguelike. Starting over is always annoying, as you start off slow and with your starting weapon, which usually isn't the best. And it's also repetitive, as you keep playing and playing, you might get the same items over again or the same guns. Although there's a lot of items and guns, you can get the same thing over and over again, as well as the same bosses and enemies and room placements. But it tries to randomize itself pretty well, so it won't be repetitive until like you play over 100 hours of it. So it's honestly really good, and I have, I think, over 150 hours into the game, as well as its sequel, Exit the Gungeon, which is also really fun. Number 42. Now I'm probably going to get a bit of hate for this one, as a lot of people praise this game to be one of the best fighting games of all time, if not one of the best games of all time in general. And I do have to admit, it's a really good game, but I think the number 42 spot is Super Smash Bros. Melee. Now don't get me wrong, I still think Melee is a really good game. In fact, I think it is the best fighting game, as I think I did put it as the highest fighting game on my list, and getting number 42 is still really good, as I think Smash Melee is probably the best Smash game. Although I do like Ultimate and Brawl a little bit as well, I think Melee just outnudges them by a little bit, as I found that Ultimate had probably the best cast of characters, although being really big and a lot of characters being viable, knowing the matchup was a bit annoying, but I found it to be the best cast because there were so many characters. And I found Brawl being the best in terms of single player, as Subspace Emissary and their cutscenes was really cool to watch and see, as well as just the gameplay in Subspace was pretty unique. But I think Melee kind of just has everything, really. Melee has some of the most wackiest and weird physics that gamers are still finding new mechanics today, even, of Melee, that are just not really part of the game, but are just found within the game, as it's not, the things that are in Melee aren't really intended. Like wave dashing wasn't really intended, but yet people found it and found the use of it in terms of the match, like in terms of gameplay, how wave dashing can be useful in terms of movement in the game, although it's not meant to be an actual thing in the game, which I found is pretty cool. And there's so much to learn in Melee, as there's wave dash, wave landing, canceling, L canceling, knowing when to grab the ledge, like ledge hogging and stuff like that. There's so much to learn in Melee that it just makes it so much more replayable, as there's so much to learn in the game. And it also has a pretty good adventure mode, like going back to even just being casual and not really competitive. It just has a great adventure mode, great cast of characters, great classic mode. There's just a lot to do single player wise, although its main focus is multiplayer, which is kind of the downside to it, as you really want to play with other people, but there really isn't much to do by yourself, really. And so it's kind of the same situation as Killer Queen Black, where you have to kind of find people to play with. And although it's not really hard with Melee, with Slippy and having the online scene and stuff, and even rollback netcode, which is better than Ultimate, it's still kind of repetitive here and there, and it's not all characters are good per se. Unlike Ultimate, which has a bunch of every character is pretty much viable in a sense. There isn't really like a significantly worse character like in Melee where it's like Bowser or Pichu or Kirby, which are like really bad, and like if they go up against Fox they'll most likely die. In Ultimate there really isn't like a bad character where they're gonna like really have a disadvantage, but in Melee there are really bad characters that just are completely broken in the bad sense. And so that's why it's kind of at 42, because not every character is good and they're trash characters, but they're also really insane characters like Fox and Falco that can just do crazy stuff. But like I said before, amazing things in Melee, like learning a bunch of new moves and mechanics, as well as the just overall funness of the game, the movement, the physics, it's all there. And sadly the newer Smash don't really have that movement or controller advanced tech as Melee does, and that's why Melee is, in my opinion, the best Smash game, and thus deserves its spot at number 42. Number 41. Now this game was a big game of my childhood, as I would play this game pretty much everywhere and anywhere, and I probably have at least 100 hours into this game, as I would just keep playing levels over and over again, as there wasn't really much else to do. And that game was Super Mario World. Now Super Mario World, I played that on the Game Boy Advance, and I would play that anywhere honestly, and I had so much fun just playing through levels over and over again. I remember I would play through like 1-1 over and over again, although there was a branching path. I think I did the one on the left, and I would just play it over and over again. Just had so much fun just playing through it and going through and doing the bonus levels when you get 100 stars, and it's honestly just a fun game. There's so many different secrets and levels, and there are hidden buttons that you could click that would give you more platforms or more power-ups if you hit them, and it was just a ton of fun honestly. Also introduced Yoshi, which is everyone's classic Mario character that they know and love, as well as unique bosses being the Koopalings. Although the Koopalings came out in Super Mario Bros. 3, they were kind of unique in this game, as in Super Mario Bros. 3 they were all kind of the same, but in this game they had a bit more personality to them, as each boss was completely different, whether it be on a tilting platform or being in a pipe and having like clones of themselves or dummies that would try and trick you. And it was just a more it gave it more personality to the Koopalings, which even the new Super Mario Bros. Games don't really do, as they're pretty much repetitive like they were in Super Mario Bros. 3. But overall, Super Mario World had a lot of secrets as well, a lot of secret levels and worlds like the special world, and it was a ton of fun to discover those as well as to play them. And it was a pretty big challenge as well, as it was it's a lot harder than the other games, and even when you died you go back to your last save, which would be either the mini castle or the castle or whatever it may be. And it did get repetitive here and there, in terms of having to do levels over again when you die, as you would go back to the previous save. And you know, it definitely is, I think, the best 2D Mario game, but it's just Mario. There really isn't much special about it. There really isn't like a good story. The characters are the same: Mario, Luigi, Bowser, the Koopalings. There really isn't much else to it other than being a really good Mario game, which isn't bad. Super Mario World is a great game, but it's just Mario. It's fun Mario, but at the end of the day, it's just Mario, and so that's why it's at number 41. So there we have it. So that is my picks from number 50 to 41 in my top 100 games list. Thank you guys all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and make sure to stay tuned for next week, where we'll be doing games 40 through 31. Bye.